Chapter 1. The Day the Fire Died. The wind never stopped in Luna County. It didn't whisper like it did in other places. It howled. It came clawing down off the hills like it was chasing something invisible. Maybe it was chasing me. Or maybe it already caught me, and I just learned how to breathe through the grip. That morning, the desert wasn't peaceful. It was pissed off. Dust in the eyes, sandpaper on the skin, that kind of pissed off. And I remember standing outside the camper, my home, my sanctuary, my punishment, watching smoke curl into the sky like a signal I didn't know I was sending. The batteries in my sister's rig had gone off like a warning from the universe. One little mistake, a careless moment, and the whole damn thing went up. Gone. That camper was more than shelter. It was trust. A piece of me I gave away in good faith, trying to rewrite a story that always seemed to end the same: fire, ash, loss. I stood there barefoot on scorched dirt, ash floating in the wind, thinking, this is where the story starts, not where it ends. See, people think rock bottom is a place. Some alley, some cell, some rehab bed with fluorescent lights and a clipboard at your feet. But it's not. For me, rock bottom was realizing I'd spent most of my life trying to save other people from burning while the fire inside me never stopped spreading. I was made of matches, raised in chaos, wired for pain and programmed to smile through it. There were nights I got so high I forgot my name. Nights I got so low I remembered everyone else's. Every voice that told me I wasn't enough. Every eye that looked at me like I was something to fix or something to fear. And still I kept coming back. Not because I wanted to, but because some part of me, the part that never quit, kept whispering, not like this. I didn't come to the desert to find God. I came here to shut the world out. But the desert don't play by your rules. It don't let you hide. It strips you, forces you to look at yourself without distractions. And what I saw when the dust finally settled wasn't a monster, wasn't a saint, just a man. A man who survived everything that should have killed him and somehow still believed in redemption. The kind of redemption that don't come easy. I wasn't born broken. I was born awake in a world that wanted me asleep. And every time I tried to numb it, drugs, women, violence, laughter that didn't reach the eyes, it came back louder, angrier, until I stopped running and just stood still. Right there, with soot in my lungs and guilt in my gut, I decided something. If I'm still breathing, I'm not done yet. This ain't a sob story. This is a survival manual disguised as a memoir. You're going to read some things that hurt. You're going to hear names that never made the news but shaped the man I became. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see your own scars reflected in mine. Because this story, it ain't just mine anymore. It's yours too. Let's begin. Chapter 2. Raised by Ghosts. I didn't grow up in a home. I grew up in a war zone wearing a smile. Somewhere between a busted TV and a backhanded compliment, I learned how to read moods like survival maps. If Mama's eyes were glazed and Daddy's jaw was tight, I knew it was time to disappear. Not physically. No, that came later. At first, I just disappeared inside. Slipped into myself like a trapdoor, locked the latch, and watched the world through a crack in the wood. See, people romanticize pain. They call it character building. But when you're 5 years old and learning to stay silent in the middle of a screaming match, you ain't thinking about character. You're thinking about escape. Even if it's just in your head. Some of us were born into bloodlines, others into land, and some of us were born into storms. And we didn't have the luxury of waiting for the rain to stop. We built rafts out of instinct and trauma, and we paddled like hell through the flood. By the time I was a teenager, I was fluent in 2 languages, bullshit and body language. I knew how to smile without meaning it, how to fight without throwing a punch, and how to disappear in a room full of people. I became whoever the room needed me to be. Brother, protector, liability, weapon, clown. Especially the clown. That funny guy everyone loved? That was a mask. A damn good one, too. It made people laugh, kept them from asking the real questions. It bought me time. Time to self-destruct quietly. Time to sabotage every relationship before it got close enough to see the wreckage. And still, I loved hard. That's the part most folks miss about people like me. We don't just hurt deep, we love deep. Fiercely, stupidly, dangerously. We'll burn ourselves down to keep someone else warm. We'll take a bullet and still apologize for bleeding on your shoes. I carried that kind of love like a curse, thought it was loyalty, but it was really desperation. I was begging the world to prove me wrong, to show me I wasn't just another broken piece of a broken line of broken people. But ghosts don't give up easy. I remember the first time I tasted real silence. Not the kind you get in a quiet room, but the kind that comes after you've buried your past in the sand and dared it to dig itself back up. That kind of silence is sacred. It's earned. And I earned mine the hard way. You know what's worse than growing up in chaos? Becoming addicted to it. Making it your comfort zone. Chasing drama like a junkie just to feel something familiar. That was me. For years. Until one day, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because I had changed, but because I finally saw him clearly. Beneath the scars, the dirt, the reputation, I saw a boy who'd been waiting his whole damn life to be safe. And that boy? He deserved better. So I made him a promise. We're not dying like this. I didn't know how I was going to pull it off. I didn't have a blueprint or a backup plan, just a gut full of grit and a heart that refused to stop beating. I packed up what little I had, drove into the desert, and started building a life out of scraps. Not perfect, not polished, but mine. And out here, in this lonely, wide-open nowhere, I found something I never thought I'd get. Space to heal. And healing? That's its own kind of rebellion. Because the world never expected me to make it past 25, but I did. Now I'm coming for everything they said I'd never have. You feel that? That's not the win, that's legacy. And it's only Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Meth, Smoke, and Moonlight. By the time I moved back to Deming, the desert felt more like a coffin than a cradle. The sky stretched endless above me, unforgiving and clear, like it was watching me come undone in real time. I had a pocket full of guilt, lungs full of smoke, and a mind riddled with memories I couldn't shake. Everything I had touched turned to dust. I was spiraling, quietly, violently, beautifully. I'd been running product, weed mostly, between Las Cruces and Deming. Made decent money at first, felt like I had momentum again. But the meth always waited for me like an old lover. Patient, seductive, deadly. It didn't take long before I wasn't selling anymore. I was using. Selling became the excuse. Using became the routine. Nobody saw me fall. That was the point. I didn't want my family to know. Didn't want to see the judgment in their eyes, or worse, the sadness. I was tired of letting people down. Tired of pretending I had it figured out. So I disappeared. Packed what little I had into the bed of my truck and drove out past the pavement, into the belly of nowhere. No power, no plumbing, no shame. Just me and the wind, howling like it had secrets to confess. That's when I started living off-grid. People think off-grid means freedom, peace, a return to nature. And maybe it does, for some. But for me, it was exile, self-imposed. I didn't need the world, and the world sure as hell didn't need me. I lived in the silence because I believed I belonged there. But in that silence, something unexpected started to happen. I started to hear myself again. Not the version that was fried out and paranoid, not the version who chased highs and lost years, but the core, the real Jesse. The kid with dreams, the man with purpose. The ghost of the person I used to be before pain became my compass. Nights were the hardest, cold, dark, and slow, but that's when the stars would show up, unapologetically bright, and somehow in that massive cosmic display, I felt like maybe I hadn't been forgotten completely. Maybe I was still on the map, even if just a flicker on the edge of it. I started writing again, started speaking to myself out loud, started surviving instead of just existing. This chapter isn't redemption. It's not victory. It's not the comeback. It's the descent, the honest, painful unraveling of a man who'd lost his footing. But sometimes you have to come apart before you can come together. And me, I was just getting started. Chapter 4. The Rattlesnake and the Mirror. The sun doesn't rise out here. It erupts. Every morning, without fail, like it's daring you to keep going. Like it's asking, "You still alive, Jesse?" And most mornings, I didn't have an answer. I just stood in the doorway of that beat-up camper, barefoot in the dust, coffee cup shaking in my hand, watching the light spill over the mountains like blood from an old wound. That's when I saw the rattlesnake. Coiled just a few feet from where I stood. Silent. Still. But deadly as truth. And something about that moment made me freeze. Not in fear, but in recognition. We were the same, that snake and I. He didn't want to bite. He didn't want to be seen. He just wanted space, wanted the world to quit stepping too close, quit thinking they knew what he was. But the second you pushed him, he'd strike. I watched him for what felt like an hour. Neither of us moved. And then, without warning, he slithered back under a rock and disappeared, like a shadow retreating into the past. I stood there for a long time after, thinking about how much of me was still venom and fang, still coiled, still waiting for the world to get too close. That's when I built the mirror. I found a busted side mirror from an old Ford pickup out near the arroyo, cleaned it up, bolted it to a pole outside my camper. I made myself look into it every morning, no matter how strung out, no matter how sunburned or sleep-deprived or ashamed. I made myself face it. I didn't like what I saw. At first, all I saw was failure, a man who'd abandoned his potential, a ghost with scars instead of skin. But then, over time, I saw details. The eyes were still sharp, the soul was still there, just hiding. The rage hadn't died, it had just curled in on itself like that snake. And under the rage there was something else. Hunger. Not for drugs, not for money, for meaning. For a way to take all this brokenness and do something with it. I started making plans again. Started pulling from junk piles, wiring together solar panels with scraped wire, setting up barrels for rain catch. The wind never stopped screaming through the desert, but I started to hear something else in it. My voice. The one I'd buried beneath addiction, beneath regret, beneath the lies I'd told myself to survive. I wasn't just off-grid anymore. I was off-program. Society didn't teach me how to do this. Rehab didn't fix me. Prison didn't shape me. I was forging myself in the quiet, in the struggle, in the rattlesnake moments and the mirror mornings. This chapter was the pivot. The first time I realized that maybe I wasn't cursed. Maybe I was called. And if that's true, then I had one hell of a message to deliver. Chapter 5. The God in the Wires. There was this night. Wind howling like a banshee through the scrub, stars sharp enough to cut you open. And I was out there with a headlamp on, elbow deep in a battery bank I'd built out of salvaged golf cart cells and rusted copper braid. My fingers were black with grease, but my thoughts were electric. I wasn't just wiring power, I was resurrecting pieces of myself. Every bolt I torqued down was a choice, keep going or give up. Every short circuit, every shock, every blown fuse was a reminder. You don't get to shortcut your redemption. You earn it. In scars, in sweat, in sleepless nights trying to figure out why the inverter keeps tripping when the fridge kicks on. I didn't have textbooks or blueprints. What I had was instinct, a kind of primal engineering. Like the knowledge wasn't mine, it was just waiting inside me, buried under all the trauma and static. And once I started listening, once I got quiet enough, I could hear it. The hum. It came through the wires, through the ground, through the hollow spaces in my chest. A low, holy frequency that vibrated with the truth. There's a God in the machine, and he doesn't live in churches. He lives in the current, in the pulse of power from panel to load, in the discipline of not overcharging a lithium pack even though you're desperate to run the grinder at midnight. He lives in the hum of 12 volts steady, even when the whole world runs on chaos. And that night, I realized something that changed me forever. I was the system. The generator and the drain, the voltage and the resistance, the spark and the goddamn ground fault. I'd spent years blaming my wiring, bad childhood, bad influences, bad decisions, but maybe all that pain wasn't malfunction. Maybe it was design. Maybe I had to short out a few times before I understood how to carry this much power without burning everything down. That's when the coyotes started howling. Not in fear, not in hunger, but in recognition. Like they could feel it too. This moment where a man stops being a victim and starts becoming a force. I stood up from that battery bank, hands tingling, and laughed like a mad prophet, because I finally understood what this off-grid life was. It wasn't escape. It was initiation. And the God in the wires had just made me his apprentice. Chapter 6. The Weight of Quiet. They say silence is peaceful, they say it's healing, but they never tell you about the weight of it. Not the kind of silence you get in meditation apps or yoga retreats. I'm talking about the real kind, the deep desert kind. The kind that crawls into your ears and sets up camp in your chest. The kind that strips away every noise you used to use to distract yourself from you. Out here, there's no traffic hum. No neighbors fighting through thin apartment walls. No distant sirens to remind you the world is still spinning. There's just wind, dirt, and your thoughts. And God help you if you're not ready to meet them. I remember this stretch, middle of the second winter. Solar was low, batteries were cold, water tank had a hairline crack. But the real fracture was internal. Because out there, with nobody around, the ghosts get louder. The voices of old regrets, bad trips, burned bridges. They start narrating your every move. You blew it, she ain't coming back. You had your shot, and you let it rot. You can't fight them by yelling. Out here, yelling just makes you look crazy to the jackrabbits. So I started writing them letters, on scrap plywood, on the back of receipts, in the margins of old DMV forms I found under the seat of the truck. Not to silence the ghosts, but to give them purpose. One letter turned into two, then a page, then a stack. Before I knew it, I wasn't writing to my past anymore. I was writing to the version of me I hadn't met yet. A future Jesse. A man who survived the silence. Who understood its weight wasn't a punishment. It was training. Because once you learn to carry silence, you can walk into any room, any storm, any chaos, and bring stillness with you. Not to shut people up, but to wake them up. Silence is a mirror, and if you stare into it long enough, you see what you really are. And what I saw. A man rebuilding, not just with tools, but with truth. A man who'd stopped running, not because he was tired, but because he finally realized there's nowhere more powerful to stand than still. Medicine in the mud. There's a moment in every journey where the path ain't a path anymore. It's just terrain, uneven, raw, wet with whatever storm just rolled through, and you either push forward and sink a little, or you turn back clean. I chose to get dirty. See, people always talk about healing like it's gentle, like it's soft light and sage smoke and deep breathing with your eyes closed. That's not what it looked like for me. For me, healing was finding myself face down in desert clay, cracked lips, sunburned neck, everything I thought I needed, gone. And instead of screaming, "Why me?" I whispered, "Now what?" That was the shift. I started treating the pain like a teacher, not a punishment. Every moment that bruised me had a message baked in. The loneliness, it taught me how to be company for myself. The anger, it showed me where I still gave my power away. The shame, that one was deeper. Sticky, like tar on my spirit. But even that had roots in love. Twisted love, maybe, but still love. That's when I realized the mud isn't there to trap you. It's there to pull something out of you. And somewhere in that mess, I started finding medicine. Not the kind you buy, not the kind you snort, sip, or shoot. I'm talking about the ancestral kind. The kind that lives in silence, in stillness, in struggle. I learned to listen to the wind like it had secrets. I started noticing how plants reached for the sun even after getting stomped on. I watched fire, how it devours but also purifies. Everything around me became a sermon. No preacher, no pews, just me and the raw gospel of nature, reminding me I was still alive. And in a world where most folks are sleepwalking through comfort, being truly, painfully, beautifully alive is the rarest medicine of all. So yeah, I stayed in the mud, because mud is where seeds crack open. And brother, I was just starting to grow. Chapter 8. The Ghosts I Carried. They don't tell you how loud it gets when the world goes quiet. Out in the desert, where the wind is your only witness and the stars don't blink, you start to hear things. Not with your ears, with your bones. It's the ghosts, not the kind that rattle chains or moan in the night. These ones are quieter, more familiar. They live in your old decisions. They speak in your father's voice. They walk with your younger self's limp, dragging pieces of the past like chains made of what-ifs. I carried ghosts. Some had names. Some were just feelings that never grew up into words. There was the one that looked like a kid with dirty hands, always asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" Another wore the face of an ex-lover, but she didn't speak. Just looked at me with those eyes that say, "You broke something sacred." And then there were the ones that weren't even mine. Generational shadows, inherited silence. The trauma passed like family recipes, except this stew was made of absence and aching. But I didn't run. Not anymore. I made a fire, and I sat with them. One by one, I let them step forward. Not to haunt me, to teach me, because every ghost is just a wound that waited too long for light. The boy with dirty hands? He just wanted someone to tell him that survival was enough. The woman with the broken gaze? She reminded me that love doesn't mean possession. And letting go doesn't mean you never cared. Even the ancestral ones, the ones whose names I'll never know, they just needed someone, anyone, to say, "It stops with me." I thought healing would be about forgetting, but it turned out to be about remembering and forgiving what I found. I realized those ghosts weren't there to punish me. They were there to pass the torch, to give me the chance to walk forward without dragging them behind me. So I did something wild. I thanked them. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel so loud. It felt like peace. Because you can't be haunted by what you've made peace with. And that night, with the desert watching, I finally slept like a man who knew where he stood. Among the living. Chapter 9. When the wind spoke my name. There's a moment, after enough time alone, when nature stops being background noise. It starts to talk to you. Not in sentences, not in words, but in memory, vibration, instinct. I remember the wind that night. It wasn't just blowing, it was speaking. It swept across the land like an old friend returning with stories I forgot I lived through. It whistled through the cracks of my camper like a warning and a lullaby at the same time. And somewhere between those howls and hushes, it called my name. Not Jesse, not Sutton, but the soul name, the one you don't hear with ears, the one the world tried to beat out of you before you even learned how to fight back. It said, "You were never meant to shrink to fit their silence." I sat on the edge of my rust-scraped steps, boots dusty, hoodie pulled over my head, eyes locked on the nothingness that stretched beyond the dirt. And I finally asked the question out loud, "What now?" No big boom of God's voice replied, no burning bush, no lightning bolt epiphany, just more wind, more whisper, more reminder. Keep going. That's it. No glory, no gold stars, just the sacred grind of becoming. Becoming a man who doesn't flinch when the past knocks, becoming a father who breaks cycles instead of bones, becoming a creator who doesn't chase perfection, just truth. I looked at my hands, scarred, calloused, capable. They'd built, they'd destroyed, they'd trembled. But they were still mine, and they still worked. That was enough. The wind died down by sunrise, but something stayed behind. A silence that didn't ache, a stillness that didn't accuse. And I knew the world had shifted. Or maybe I had. Either way, the next chapter had already started. And this time I wasn't waiting on a sign. I was the sign. Chapter 10. The Edge of the Map. They don't tell you this part when you're growing up. They hand you a map full of roads, cities, promises, but none of it matters once you hit the edge. That's where I was living now. Not metaphorically. Literally. Out in the forgotten zone, where GPS gives up and dust devils tell stories better than books. No streetlights, no neighbors, no backup plans. Just raw earth, hard lessons, and the hum of my own mind trying to stay sane. See, when you're out this far, the silence isn't just empty. It's pregnant, carrying every memory, every regret, every could-have been that you buried in the name of survival. And one by one, they come back. Not to haunt you, to test if you're still running. I wasn't. That was the difference. Back when I was in town, when I was just another face trying to blend into concrete and bills, I ran from everything. Responsibility, emotion, myself. But out here, there's nowhere left to run. You either face it or die by it. I faced it. I faced the day my son looked at me like a stranger. I faced the time I pawned memories just to get high. I faced the moment I realized my survival wasn't strength, it was stalling. So I started walking. Each day, no destination, just movement, across sand, through wind, into clarity. And out there, something wild happened. The land began to remember me. Animals stopped darting when I passed. The birds sat closer. The coyote tracks overlapped mine, like they knew we shared a secret. I wasn't a trespasser anymore. I was home. At the edge of the map where fear used to live, I built a new border. Not to keep the world out, but to mark the point where I reclaimed who the hell I was. Not a convict, not a junkie, not a cautionary tale, but a beginning. So when people ask me now, "Where are you?" I smile and I say, exactly where the map ends, because that's where I began. Chapter 11. Smoke signals from the edge. The nights off-grid hit different. Not just darker, but louder too. Coyotes sang like broken radios tuned to a frequency only the wilderness understood. The wind didn't just blow, it whispered. Names, regrets, old laughter, maybe even the echoes of all the versions of Jesse I used to be. Out there, in the dirt and the sagebrush, I didn't have mirrors. Just memories. And those were cracked. I remember heating up water in a blackened pot over a propane flame, just to feel some kind of comfort. I'd wash my face like I was baptizing the man I wanted to become, the one who didn't flinch at his own reflection. But some mornings, I still saw the guy who disappeared after that pod concert. The guy who watched everything he loved turn to smoke. The guy who went from being somebody to sleeping in the back of a truck like a ghost that hadn't figured out it was dead yet. But here's the twist. I wasn't dead. I was becoming. The isolation didn't kill me. It peeled me back, layer by layer. Took everything fake, everything I was doing just to survive in the world's bullshit system, and burned it off like morning frost. What was left was real. Ugly, honest, scarred-up truth. And for once, that was enough. Chapter 12. Lightning strikes twice. Sometimes in the dead quiet of the desert you hear a sound that doesn't belong. Not the wind, not the buzz of insects or the distant bark of a stray dog. Something different. Electric. Primal. Like the sky clearing its throat before it screams. That's how I knew the storm was coming. I'd been chasing my own weather for years. Drugs, chaos, love I didn't know how to hold. But this storm wasn't metaphor. It was thunder in bone. I watched it roll in over the mesa like it had a score to settle. And I stood there, arms wide, like a man daring God to miss. The first bolt hit so close it knocked the air out of me. Flash, boom, then silence. For a split second I swore I saw something. A flicker in the dark. A silhouette against the sky. Not a ghost. Not an angel. Just a version of me. The me that never gave up. The me that learned how to take a hit and not fold. I used to think survival was luck. But that night, I knew better. Survival is choice. It's crawling through the wreckage, bleeding, hungry, alone, and choosing to keep moving anyway. And sometimes lightning does strike twice. First time it burns everything down, leaves you naked, raw, scorched to the soul. Second time, it shows you what's left standing. And that what's left is you. I made a fire after that storm, not just for warmth. For memory. For ritual. I sat there watching the flames dance, the thunder crawling away into the distance, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not because the storm was gone, but because I finally understood why it came. You want chapter 13? Chapter 13. The wind knows my name. They say the desert is empty, that it's a wasteland, that nothing real can grow here. But they don't know the language of the wind. They don't know how it whispers your name when you're ready to give up. Out here, everything is stripped down to truth. There's no crowd to impress, no stage to perform on. Just sand, silence, and your own damn self looking back at you like, well, what now? When I first got out here, I thought I was escaping. From pain, from people, from myself. But the desert isn't a hiding place. It's a mirror. You come out here thinking you'll disappear, but if you stay long enough, you start to appear. For real this time. No mask, no front, just you, and the elements testing your every word. You think you can lie to the wind? Nah. She's been around longer than your ego, and she'll be around long after it dies. You try to puff up, pretend you're still the man you used to be? She'll knock that right out of you with one good gust. But if you speak truth, raw, ugly, vulnerable truth, she'll carry it like a prayer. That's how I started talking again. Not to people. Not at first. Just talking. To the dirt. To the sky. To the versions of me that never made it this far. I'd say their names out loud like I was calling them home. Jesse the dealer. Jesse the son. Jesse the lost. And the wind answered. She'd pick up dust and wrap it around my ankles like a reminder. You are not done. You are still here. So speak. And keep speaking. So I kept talking, and somewhere in that broken rhythm between the wind and my voice, I found a kind of rhythm, a kind of song, a kind of sermon, even if no one was listening. Because maybe it wasn't for them, maybe it was for the land, or maybe it was for the me I was still becoming. And the wind knew my name the whole damn time. Let's keep going, yeah? Chapter 14. Chapter 14. Fire in the Bones. There's a fire that lives in your bones, not the kind you can see or touch. It's deeper, hotter, the kind that doesn't burn you up, it lights you up. For years I thought my fire was the stuff I was chasing, drugs, validation, control, but those were just sparks, quick and blinding. The real fire? It's slow, steady. It's the hunger that won't quit, even when you're broken down to your core. Out in the desert, you learn to feel that fire when the nights freeze and the wind bites like a knife. You don't just survive the cold, you fuel your insides with something stronger. I started waking up before dawn, not because I had to, but because the fire wouldn't let me sleep. It pulled me out of the camper, into the dark, into the work. Wiring panels, fixing leaks, setting traps for water, building not just a shelter, but a home. That fire became my compass. When doubt crept in, it was the spark I returned to. When loneliness pressed heavy, it was the warmth I leaned on. And when the old ghosts came knocking, that fire didn't roar. They didn't stand a chance. Because I'd found something worth fighting for. Not the world, not a person, not even a second chance. But me, the man I'm still becoming. And that's a fire no one can ever put out. Ready for chapter 15? Chapter 15. The Weight of Redemption. Redemption isn't light. It's not some easy fix or a clean slate handed to you by fate. It's heavy, like carrying every mistake you made in your pockets and still choosing to walk forward. I've carried that weight for years. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw it staring back, a man marked by his past but refusing to be defined by it. Sometimes it felt like I was drowning in it. Like the ghosts of those I hurt, and the pain I couldn't undo were chains wrapped tight around my soul. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Redemption isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with new eyes. Seeing the wreckage, feeling the scars, and still choosing to build. That's what I'm doing now. Piece by piece, moment by moment. I'm reclaiming the man I lost to the streets, the drugs, the lies. And yeah, the weight's still there. But it's not a burden anymore. It's a reminder that I'm alive, that I'm trying, that I'm worth the fight. This chapter isn't the end, it's just another step on a road I'm still walking, and I'm walking it with every ounce of my heart. Chapter 16, when you're ready. Chapter 16. Seeds in the Sand. The desert isn't just a place where things die, it's a place where things grow, slow, stubborn, against all odds. At first, I thought I was just surviving out here, fighting to keep the dust out of my lungs, the cold out of my bones. But then something shifted. I started noticing the small things. A sprout pushing through cracked earth, the way the mesquite trees reach for light, even when the sky is gray, the tenacity of life in a place that looks like it shouldn't exist. That tenacity reminded me of myself, of what I was capable of, even when it felt like everything was working against me. I planted seeds, literal ones, near the camper, watered them with scraped-together rainwater, watched them stretch and fight for every inch. They didn't grow overnight. They didn't grow easy. But they grew. That's when I realized something bigger was happening. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was cultivating it. Root by root, day by day. And in that patience, in that quiet work, I found hope. Not the flashy kind that makes headlines or songs, but the steady kind that makes life. Because sometimes the greatest victories don't come from fireworks. They come from seeds in the sand. Ready for chapter 17? Chapter 17. The mirror cracks. There comes a time when the mirror breaks. Not all at once, but in pieces. Small fractures that widen with every glance. I stared at my reflection one morning, not because I wanted to see myself, but because I needed to face what I'd become. Some cracks were obvious. Years of hard living, nights without sleep, scars both inside and out. Others were hidden beneath the surface. Old wounds I thought had healed, old lies I told myself to get through the day. The man looking back wasn't a stranger. He was someone I knew too well. A man who'd fought his demons, but sometimes still danced with them. That reflection forced me to reckon with the truth. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't invincible. I was human. And that was okay. Because the cracks, they let the light in. Light I needed to see the path forward. Light that showed me where I'd fallen, but also where I could rise. The mirror cracked, and I didn't shy away. I leaned into the fractures. I embraced the brokenness, because it was in those cracks where the real story lived, and the real healing begins. Chapter 18, whenever you're ready. Chapter 18, The Long Road Back. Recovery isn't a sprint. It's a marathon through mud and fire, where every step forward feels like a battle, and every setback is a reminder that this fight is far from over. I learned that the hard way. There were days when the past pulled me under like quicksand, when old habits whispered sweet lies in my ear, promising relief, escape, anything but facing the rawness of now. But I kept putting one foot in front of the other. Sometimes it was a crawl, sometimes it was a stumble, sometimes it was a full-on fall. But every time I got up, because I realized that the long road back wasn't about reaching some perfect destination. It was about showing up, day after day, in the mess, in the doubt, in the hope. And along that road I found moments, small victories that tasted like freedom, like waking up and choosing clarity over chaos, like hearing my son laugh and knowing I'm still here for him. The journey is still ahead, the map's still being drawn, but the compass is steady now, and I'm walking, slowly, surely, toward a life worth living. Ready for Chapter 19? Chapter 19. The Fire Inside. There's a fire that doesn't burn out. It's not the reckless blaze of youth or the wild spark of addiction. It's something quieter, deeper, a steady flame that keeps you warm when the world's cold. For years I chased after chaos, thinking that fire was my salvation, but it only consumed me. Now I carry a different flame, one that's born from pain, yes, but also from hope and resilience. This fire inside me fuels the mornings I want to skip. It lights the nights when doubt creeps in. It's the pulse in my veins reminding me I'm still alive, still fighting. And the best part? It's mine. No one can take it away. No one can snuff it out. This fire is my legacy, my promise, to myself, to my son, to the man I'm still becoming. And as long as it burns, there's always a way forward.